Good morning, students. So welcome you all again for another masterclass with Chess Gurukul. I'm Grandmaster Aarti here. Good morning, students. So welcome you all again for another masterclass with Chess Gurukul. I'm Grandmaster Aarti here. So today we will be looking at a game of Magnus Carlsen. So the main theme is that Carlsen is also beatable, right? So let's just check the game. Carlsen plays a young boy. It should be about 18 or so. So this game was played in Vacancy in 2021. Andre Espianco is white against Magnus Carlsen. So they begin with the Sicilian Defense. So this is the Nechtov variation of the Sicilian Defense. So speaking of the Sicilian Defense, it is very close to my heart because I always played Sicilian throughout my career. So it's very enterprising both for white and for black. So a lot of tactical possibilities, mainly because it is mostly it's opposite side castling or pawn storming, attack with pawn storming. So here they go into this variation of classical Sicilian. So now the regular variation starts with castling, but then here, for instance, we can look at like G4 is a very enterprising option, very attacking option, I would say. So to begin with G4 and B5. So this is the typical Sicilian setup where white is attacking and then black is attacking on the other side of the board. So we played G4 to play G5. So obviously white continues with the attack. So now bishop takes G5. So here, white sacrifices a pawn, but for initiative. So what are the advantages he's gained by sacrificing the pawn? It's just that the G file is open and black will not be able to castle. And even if he castles on the king side, he's going to have a strong attack against his king. So now bishop takes E3, queen takes E3. So we come to a position where white is just a pawn down, isn't it? So let's see what Andre wants to do. He's sacrificed a pawn against the world champion. So queen h4. Queen h4, it's not so good move, I think, because we have pieces to develop and it might not be the best option to bring out the queen in the opening. White boldly gives another pawn with rook g1, but he's attacking g7 here. So black goes with g6. And now let us think, what do we want to do as white? So looking at the position, White has developed all his pieces excepting his king. That is, he's yet to castle, right? So I think in the opening, when we begin playing the opening, we must castle as soon as possible, right? So white castles, and now it's black's turn. So black goes queen e7 because the d6 pawn is weak, right? And also he wants to bring out his pieces. So he needs to play bishop b7 and then knight c6. So it's going to take time. So here I want all of you to think and see what we can play. So it's white's turn. Please think. Right. So at this point, we have castled, right? We have brought out all the pieces. So what do we do? Here, I guess we should just play f4. So what is the point of f4? The idea of f4 is to, break the center with f5. Probably at the right point, maybe not now, but at the correct point. So now bishop b7. So how do we continue with the attack? So directly to play f5 or to play some other preparatory moves and then to play f5. Okay, here what happens if we directly play f5? Black is not yet cancelled. So we should also be ready for black to make a castle on the queen side if needed. So all the more we break the center and we give strong squares on f5, e5, right? See, suppose we play f5 here, then the knight would come to e5, right? Knight e5 is a very strong square, correct? So probably to hurry up with f5 at present is not good. So now what can we do? I think the best move here would be to play a subtle move, king b1. So what does king b1 do? In most of the Sicilians, king b1 is played. That is, when we go into action with f5, e5 kind of breaks, we want to have the king safe on b1 because king c1 might allow some kind of counterplay with queen g5 check and so on later. So knight c6 was played by black. So what is knight c6 do? Knight c6 develops, and also he might want to castle on the queen side. Right. So now as white, if we start exchanging pieces, the development advantage we had would fizzle out. So we don't want to exchange the pieces. As white, what can we do? So now we've developed all the pieces, we've castled, we've taken the king to safety, then we're controlling the center. So now it's time for action. So what are the moves we could think of? I think once we do everything, like develop, castle, have proper control of the center, and especially when opponent is underdeveloped and king in the center, we need to go in for action, right? So what can we do? What action should we do? So it is action in the sense probably sacrifice or break the position, what do we do? So mostly in such positions, either we have to do some pawn break or go in for a sacrifice to open up the position. So here it is a beautiful sacrifice with knight c b5. Okay. So knight c b5. Now it's time to calculate. So what do we do? Knight c b5, and obviously we have to calculate what if he takes, what if he doesn't. So if he doesn't, we just a pawn up, right? There's no problem. So the main question is if he takes. So here we need to think and come up with answers after calculation. So it's a very small calculation here. Yes. So now we've lost a piece for a pawn, but all black's pieces are, very not so in coordination. They're without coordination, and some pieces are hanging. So we will make use of this by knight into c3, b into c3, and queen, knight into c6, b into c6, and queen c3, double attack. Okay, so now we attack the bishop on c6 and the rook on h8. So what is the move for black now? Very good. So it is so unfortunate that black has to give away one piece and he decides to castle. So Andrew takes queen into c6, and now Carlsen is left with a position where he has a knight for a bishop. So here I want to tell you that when we have a knight for a bishop, and if there are pawns on both sides of the board, it is always better for the side with the bishop. So now we are in a middle game, right? And if it's going to be an end game, it's clearly better for white because the b5 pawn is weak and we can make use of it, right? So here Carlsen comes up with a enterprising, pawn break, because he knows that the position is not so good for him. Carlsen is black here. So Carlsen plays d5. So white is very happy to take e into d5, and now rook f c8, and now d6. So this move, the move d6. So it is very important to play such moves. They are moves, intermediate moves, right? And also we can categorize them under active defense. So queen on c6 is attacked. So instead of taking queen into b5, we could play an active move which attacks the opponent and gives us some time, right? And also the pawn on d6 is putting pressure. So now the knight has to blockade the pawn and he cannot move. So now we would slowly start creating other counterplay on the other side of the board. Also, now because rook into a3, we need to calculate here. So black has sacrificed all the pawns on the queen side to open up because white's king is here in the king side. So now when we play queen c4, we have to calculate what happens if he takes rook a3. So let's try and visualize in our mind. When he takes rook a3, obviously we need to do something, right? So it's rook a3 and queen c7. So queen c7, again, we are making use of the passed pawn. So he doesn't want to exchange because after exchange a3 is lost, right? So queen into d8, rook into d8, and b into a3 was threatened. So now comes a very important move, which comes under the category of improving pieces. Like we all know, we always need to be checking which piece we can improve. Continuously this checking is important. So which piece we can improve? So for instance, the rook on d1 is good, queen on c7 is good, bishop on e2 can be improved, and the rook on g1 can be improved. All right. So now it comes, the choice is between the bishop on b2 and the rook on g1. Okay. So now what to do? Rook to g5. He brings the rook into the game. And what do we call this? We call this lifting the rook into the fifth rank, right? So from g1, he improves it. Okay. So now what to do? Black has, black needs to bring something up, right? So I think black will also think of something better. Probably rook a4. He doesn't want to leave his rook hanging. So he goes back with the rook. And now there are moments when we need to attack, when we should not exchange the queens. But there are moments when we need to go into the endgame. So here it is one such moment that he brings rook a5 and he activates the rook. His plan is if you exchange the rook, white is a pawn up. If not, white is going to go rook a7. Very strong on the 7th rank. All right. So now what can we do? Right. So he wants to go rook a7. I think it is very difficult for white also to, if he exchanges the rook, he simply pawn down and then the c pawn would run, right? So we could start with c4 and so on. So rook, black doesn't want to exchange the rook. So black plays rook b4 because b2 is threatened, right? Okay. And now white has just defended it with b3. And now next, what can black do? Probably he wants to push the queen away. So it's white's turn to move. Let's all start thinking as what white can play. A couple of moves. See, when we see a game, for instance, we must guess the moves always. So put yourself on the winning side and start guessing the moves. So here it's attack on the queen. So it's white move. So start guessing the moves. Very few moves are possible, right? Okay. So now we need to move the queen, isn't it? Here, maybe we don't have a intermediate move. So he just moves the queen back and queen c3 and queen d8. So now time to develop the bishop, improve the bishop, not develop. Right. So he moves the rook away. So now what to do? Okay. So queen c7 again, because again we want to exchange the queens because we are pawn up. And also that if he takes on rook into f4, then we can get the rook to the 7th rank. So that's why he goes queen c7 time and again. And now what to do? So we want to exchange pieces as white. So he exchanges the piece with rook a8, forcing him to exchange in fact. And now the knight on d7 is hanging. So what can we do? So if we play knight f8, for instance, it is not good. It is very bad, and probably white would go with d7, isn't it? Okay. So again, here Carlsen is almost losing, but the world champion doesn't give up. So he goes on to create a counterplay with queen f5. So what does queen f5 do? So what is black threatening now? we can calculate. So black's threat is to play rook into b3, check. He is pinning this pawn on c2 at present, right? So he could take the b3 pawn. Queen into d7 is one variation to be calculated here, or there are moves like queen c8 check. There are moves like king b2. So we could directly go into his variation with queen into d7, but I would not prefer that. I think queen c8 check or king b2 is an easy way to play. So for instance, if we play queen c8 check, okay, what is the point of queen c8 check? He won't be able to play king g7. Why black won't be able to play king g7? Let's calculate without moving the pieces. Right. And now we see that the king on g7 and the rook on b4 are both on black squares and can be attacked from queen c3. So we come back, queen c3, give a check, and we will take the rook. So that is why queen c8, black has to play knight d7. And then I think we can start with d7, rook into b3 check, and maybe just king a2, and no more checks, and we're going to queen the pawn. So queen check, king g7 is not possible because of queen c3 check. So we go back. So black has to go knight f8, and now we go d7, rook into b3. And remember, it is not king to c1 because king to c1 would allow the attack to continue with queen f4 check. So king a2. So now the queen on c3 is playing a very major role. It is defending the c2 pawn. And queen a5 check is nothing to be worried because we simply take the rook on b3. All right. So this would have won immediately. But white chose the safer continuation, king b2. Sometimes, you know, while we are playing a higher seeded opponent, especially the world champion in this case, it is very difficult for us to play when we get a winning position. You know, we know that we are winning somewhere, but the score sheet is not yet signed. The result is not sealed. So it is very important to keep the position, and most of us try to play it safe. So I think king b2, move like king b2 is like he's winning. So he just wants to, you know, keep everything at bay, right? So he plays rook b5 and then queen into d7. So now white is just piece up with a very powerful passed pawn on d6. So Carlsen is probably giving up everything to try something. So again, like I told you, now Andre wants to play it very safe, so he plays rook c1, defending. It's probably just piece up and the pawn is running as well, right? So d7. And now it is just winning because the pawn is also queening and white is a piece up and he's just going to promote the pawn. So we come to the conclusion where the world champion loses to a very young boy, 18-year-old Grandmaster, Andre Esipenko. So here, there are a few takeaways from this game, though we're just coming to the conclusion of the live streaming today. So what are the takeaways from this game? I think the first point was the choice of opening, because when we play a player who's very solid, I think we need to go into some volatile openings like this, where white sacrificed the pawn to begin with early in the opening, right? The g4, g5 pawn was sacrificed very early in the opening. So like this, right? And then he just sacrificed a pawn here. So this is a very interesting choice when we play against our very solid players. So we bring them into our territory if we are attacking players. And the next instance I would like to tell you is chasm. So castle is like we quickly take the king into safety and then bring the rook into play. So the next critical moment I would say was knight c b5, where we sacrificed a knight. Actually, it was not a sacrifice by itself. I think it's a pseudo sacrifice, right? So we sacrifice the knight for the time being, and then just here we get back the piece. So this precise moment, this critical moment, we need to sacrifice, because if we don't sacrifice, then the advantage would fizzle out. And next critical moment was rook g5, lifting the rook into action. So most of the times when we play a game, we sometimes forget one piece, and one piece is just lying in the corner of the board throughout the game. So I think it is very important to constantly keep asking which piece I can improve. All right. So rook g5 was the next critical moment. And after that, I think it was rook a8 to exchange one rook to reduce the uh, intensity of the attack. So after this, I think queen f5 and simply queen c8 in this critical moment. Though we are winning against a world champion, so keeping all that aside, we should have thought and gone in for the right variation with queen c8, which wins immediately. So also grandmasters, fumble under pressure. So I think that's why he didn't play queen c8 and he went into king b2. The position is so much better that even after 2-3 moderate moves or moderate hand moves, I would say, white is still winning. So, just even after rook c1, white is just winning because check and then the pawn queens on d7. That's what happened in the game. So it was a very neat finish by Andriy Espenko. And I hope all of you enjoyed this game. So wish you all the very best. Today is Vijayadashami. It's a very auspicious day to begin learning. So I wish you all the very best, and hoping to see you all in the next masterclass. And so if there's any questions, I think you would have all followed us. And if there's any questions, it was very nice following all of you here, right? So thank you so much for joining us today, and wish you all the very best.